Hello, friends, and welcome to I Know I Belong When, a podcast where bold voices, curious stories, and authentic impact amplify knowing that you are invited, seen, heard, and needed. I am your host, Christopher Bylone. This is more than a conversation. It is a movement, a mirror, a megaphone, one where raw truth meets radical hope. Welcome back to the show. Buckle up, friends. Today, we are talking belonging at race pace. From arena lights to the pit lane, our guest has built a career helping organizations win with people. John Ferguson is a strategic business executive who solves complex challenges where people, strategy, and performance meet. Most recently, as the Chief Human Resources Officer at NASCAR, he modernized people operations, championed inclusive leadership, and helped shape enterprise priorities tied to revenue growth, brand expansion, and organizational agility. His playbook has been road-tested across global hospitality, professional sports, entertainment, and media. When CEOs and boards need a trusted advisor with cultural intelligence, a results-first mindset, John is the person they want at the table. He serves on the SHRM Foundation Board, Furman University's Alumni Board, and the UNCF Orlando Leadership Council. He has been named to Sports Business Journal's 2024 40 Under 40, the Orlando Business Journal's 2024 40 Under 40, and recognized by Savoy Magazine among corporate America's most influential executives. Degrees from Furman, Georgetown, and Howard, he brings both rigor and heart to the work of belonging. Let us get this drive started. John, welcome to I Know I Belong When.
Christopher, thank you so much. Now, I need to take you on the road with me. That intro, look, I don't know if I've done all that, but apparently I have. So thank you, Christopher, so much for the invitation to join today. Mainly the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. I think it's so important in today's climate that we really focus on humanity and we focus on I know I belong when, because I don't care who you are. There has been a moment where we've either felt like an insider or an outsider. So thank you, Christopher.
Well, thank you for being here, friend. I mean, it is very true. We, in today's world, having the need to focus on humanity, I think we've lost what the human out of humanity is. You know, I was actually, last night I was watching Jane Goodall's interview on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, watch it. Talk about bringing us back to what humanity means. It was just something that just really helped me center after all the craziness that has been going on in our world. So just thank you for being here.
Happy to be here, my friend.
Let's get into the conversation. So beyond the bio, what is one experience that has most shaped you as a leader today?
All right. I thought about that deeply, and I will say it really has to go back to my foundation. I do some talks every once in a while, and I always refer to Mom and Dad LLC, my first employer. Mm-hmm. And so I think so much of who I am today is the foundation that my parents provided to me. And I think about just the lessons. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs, so it was I saw hard work day in and day out. I saw how you show up, how you represent yourself, how you represent your family is very important. And in that, they gave me opportunities to grow, learn, and do. I'll never forget when I was in high school, I came home and, neither of my parents, well, my mom specifically, had not traveled outside the U.S. My dad was a Vietnam vet, so clearly he had been beyond the borders of the U.S. Yep. And I came home and I said, hey, I want to take this trip to go to London, Rome, and Paris. And my mom was like, okay, let's do it. She herself had never been to these places. But she's like, if I can figure out a way for my son to do that, let's do it. So I appreciate them for always pushing me to strive for the best. And some of those lessons from my mom were to not be the loudest in the room, because you never want to be loud and wrong. So she taught me a good lesson of always being observant. And then I also reflect on just growing up in the church. There was always opportunities to speak. And so I really think my public speaking capabilities were rooted in doing the church announcements or, doing whatever they needed me to do on Youth Sunday. So I'm appreciative for Mom and Dad LLC and all of the foundation they provided to me.
I love the way you talk about Mom and Dad LLC, because being somebody who also grew up in a family business, growing up on a family farm, it really teaches you a lot about who you are as a person, integrity, work ethic. So love it. And also just, mom saying, okay, here's an idea, stepping outside of my comfort zone. She could have shot it down and said, yeah, nope, we're not doing that. But she just leaned in and said, yeah, let's go do it. What a wonderful way to kind of invigorate your curiosity and just kind of having a worldview. Okay, so I mentioned in your bio that you serve on multiple boards. Dude, you are listed under multiple 40 under 40s. I feel so old right now and underaccomplished, so thank you for that. So how have these platforms shaped the way you use your voice to champion belonging?
Say, the opportunity to even be recognized is the product of a village. I think that that initial village is my parents and my hometown and my family members and the people that I represent from that perspective, but also the people that have opened doors for me, also the teams that have allowed me to lead, that have allowed me to partner and collaborate. So it is an amplification of the work that we've done collectively. And so when I have those moments of reflection, I'm thankful for the journey. But it's not lost on me that this was not done independently. This was not done singularly by me. There is a village of people. There is a community of people that have helped me reach this place. And so for me, it's to make sure that whenever I enter those rooms, I figure out a way to make them bigger for others. I want to make sure that while this may be my time to be at this seat or at this table, who am I lifting behind me? That's very important to me, that I can pass that torch on to someone else, because I'm a firm believer that throughout life, I'm going to make mistakes. Christopher, you're going to make mistakes. But if you're in my village, I want to make sure that I can help you learn from my mistakes, so you don't make the same ones. You start off at a higher starting point or a faster pace, because so many people through mentoring and just being surrounded by good leaders have done that for me. So I feel an obligation to pass that forward. And I like to say, hey, if there's anything I have through experience or knowledge, if I want to give it away for free. Because there's only going to be one me, and there's only going to be one Christopher. But if I can help you, or if we can help each other become the best version of ourselves, then I've been able to use these spaces and platforms to help uplift and build others.
I was just having this exact conversation with my son last night, who is a first-year student at University of South Carolina, Darla Moore School of Business. Go Gamecocks. Because what I was saying to him was, dude, I've been here. I have made the mistakes that you have made, that you are making now. I'm trying to help you not make those same mistakes I made. So learn my lessons, but I'm here when you make those mistakes. But how can I help you not make the same mistakes or make the mistakes better?
Yes.
So, it was an interesting conversation to, talking to my 18-year-old son saying, look, I've been here, done it. How can we learn? How can you learn so you don't have to make the same mistakes I do? So really powerful, and how we're helping our network.
I want to touch on that parenthood lesson, because some of my greatest teachers have been my two daughters. But I also recall being a child, and my parents telling me, hey, this and that. We were knuckleheads. We didn't want to listen to that. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Just the other day, I was talking to my 10-year-old, Maddie. And there was a dynamic in our classroom with some of her friends. And she's like, Daddy, you just don't understand. And I was like, oh, I do. And I think part of the lesson in my head immediately was like, I do understand. But I also want you to recognize that in the spectrum of life, this is one drop in the bucket.
Yes.
So I don't want you to let this consume you in this moment. But I'm a firm believer in leading people, leading teams, leading my family, leading my kids. There are times where people have to learn through making the mistake. There were plenty of times when Mom told me that iron is hot. I didn't believe it. I had to touch it to realize it was hot. And so sometimes the best lessons in life are the ones that you might have scraped your knees on.
Yes, exactly. Alrighty, friend. On this podcast, we say names.
Okay.
And you are the inspiration for this segment. You helped me create the branding of Always Christopher, Never Chris. We know that names carry identity, legacy, and power. You go by John, not Jonathan. So what's the story behind your name, and how has the story influenced the way you introduce yourself to others?
Yes, thank you for that. Now, we're going to talk about Christopher. We're going to talk about all that at some point, right?
Yes.
All right, look, that was a very good conversation that we had, so I'm excited for that. So yes, not a Jonathan, never have been. I am John, but I don't know if we've talked about this personally yet. But my full name is John Odell Ferguson, and I was named after two uncles who passed away prior to me being born. They were my dad's brothers. They never had children, and so when I came along, my dad was like, "Well, you're going to be named John." First name, middle name, Odell, but you will go by both. And I just, growing up, if you know me, everyone's like, hey, John Odell. People think it's like one word. But when I graduated from college and became a professional, I just went with John. And so I can typically tell where people know me from, what stage of life, if they say, hey, John Odell. And so that's where my name is important. And growing up, I would quickly correct someone if they just said John. Like, no, it's John Odell. And they're like, well, that's your middle name. Yeah, but I'm from the South. It goes together. They're a match. Names are important, and I'll tell you one thing that I think about. So my wife's name is Juve, and her name is harder to pronounce because she's like, you have the easy name, John. And so in being, with her as my lifetime partner, travel mate, all those things, I can see firsthand her experience when people don't get her name right. And at first I'm like, just correct them. She's like, but you get tired of doing that every time you walk into a room, or maybe when you said your name clearly and they're like, well, I'm just going to call you something else. Like, no. My name is Juve. So I try to be extremely intentional when meeting someone for the first time. And if they have a name I'm not familiar with, I will ask them, am I saying this correctly?
Yes.
Because I think it's important. Because sometimes I'll look at it and think I'm saying it right, and I'm getting it wrong. So I just rather ask for the permission and the space for them to make sure I'm getting it right, and then make sure I continue to do that.
No, that's great. How is your wife's name spelled?
It is Yuvay.
Juve. It's also a really just pretty name. Like,
She's her Uva. I'm just gonna call you Vay, and it's like, no, my name is Juve.
Juve, like, it's also just pretty to say, so why would one of people get that wrong? Like, it brings you joy when you say it. Yeah. Like, that's just... Okay, so you alluded to the conversation we had, now a year ago about my own name. So let's dive into that, because I think for you, when you talked about how you know people where they met you on your life's journey based off of the name that they call you, right? Yours is John Odell, or when you got into the professional world is just John. I know that people know me from young Christopher when it was just Chris, right? And so I used to just say I was Chris, right? It was simple. Everybody shortened my name. Even at home, it was short. But there was a naming convention, right? Where Chris was just the everyday vernacular having conversation. But when I heard Christopher, got a little bit more formal, like they wanted my attention. But then the story behind why it's always Christopher, never Chris, is when I was younger, had a very high-pitched voice, right? I used to be able to sing Christine Daae's part from Phantom of the Opera, clear as a bell. Made a lot of girls in high school really mad, even as a child, right? By having that high-pitched voice and answering the phone, and we're dating ourselves a little bit. This was before there was video calling, before there was texting and all that kind of fun stuff. And really before answering machines really were the thing. Right? Wow. So when people would call my house and they were looking for my parents, and they would go, and eventually I would forget that they called. I have the memory of Dory. And so I would forget to tell my parents that somebody called. And they would then finally get a hold of my parents, and they would say, oh, we told your daughter. And they would be like, no, you talked to my son. Only child, there's only one of me. But it was always, hi, this is Chris. Hi, this is Chris. And so people just assumed on the other end of the line, they were talking to a girl. And then as I got into the corporate world, this is still before Zoom calls and Teams, Cisco systems, conference calls, I would pick up the phone and people would say, hi, ma'am. And I would have to correct them that, no, it's sir. And so that's when I really started to get into using Christopher, because I wanted people to not misgender me. So, and even when I was also younger in school, there was a lot of Chris's, a lot of Christophers. Born in 1981, Christopher was the second most popular boy's name Thanks, Mom. In the classroom, I would be the one who would raise my hand to be like, I'll be the Christopher, because nobody wanted their formal name used, right? But I was teacher's pet, and I was willing to, take the short straw, or the long straw, for this matter, and use my full name. So using Christopher was something that was just normal for me and comfortable. When I got into the working world, it also just helped define who I was, and it also really helped me to understand getting somebody's name correct from the beginning is creating that culture of belonging. Because if you don't get somebody's name right, then how do you expect them to know that they belong? And not just get it right, but get it right because you want to get it right. Not be like, oh my God, I'm going to butcher your name, or that's really hard to pronounce. Or, as you said, open the door and say, hi, I'm unfamiliar with your name. I would really like to be able to pronounce this correctly. Can you help me? Right?
Yes.
Because that just, it creates an opening for humanity, as we talked about at the beginning.
I'll tell you, I recall meeting Christopher for the first time, and someone shortened it, and I saw his response. I think it's always important, because I wanted to talk to Christopher and be like, what I saw your response, and that was what led to the conversation, but I never knew the history of it and what kind of led you to say, like, it's Christopher, and be adamant about that. Because going through life, just like you said, people shorten it to Chris, there are so many people that have tried to argue me down that I'm a Jonathan. I'm like, no, it is John, 4 letters. I've never been a Jonathan. They're like, no, all Johns are Jonathans. I'm like, how are you going to tell me my name? But also connecting the dot that there were a lot of Chris's, there also are a lot of Johns typically. So there would be a John F or a John O. And so John Odell just kind of gave me that option of like, clearly I am who you're talking to. I'll tell you a tip that I've learned in pronouncing names, and especially when you get an invite to a new space and you want to be warm and welcoming, there's a feature on YouTube, like how to pronounce names. And 9 times out of 10, you can search for how to pronounce this name. And there's a video that will walk you through it phonetically, how to say it. That's a pro tip I offer to the audience today that someone shared with me, because I was meeting with someone in an interview capacity, and I said, I do not know how to say this name, but like I felt like I needed to make a good first impression. So let me come with my best attempt at getting this right. And I said it, and I said, did I pronounce it correctly? And the woman said, yes, absolutely perfect. Thank you. And then we had a little dialogue. She's like, most people butcher it. So I appreciate that you were intentional in ensuring that you pronounced it correctly. So names are so meaningful. It is who we are. It is how we carry ourselves through life. And I think the most basic line is a sign of respect for recognizing how people show up.
Yeah, I think that's really important, right? When we talk about respecting people at their most basic human level, it's getting their name right. That's just the common human decency. We want to treat everybody the way they want to be treated, the platinum rule, and the first part of that is getting your name right. So now let's talk about the moment you, John, knew that you belonged. Take us to a specific room, a specific moment in your career when you realized, I belong here. What was happening around you for you to be able to say that?
I think for me, a lot of it, I'm going to keep going back to Mom and Dad LLC. My parents instilled a lot of confidence in who I am and like what I could be and the rooms I could enter. So I feel like there have been rare moments that I have had the feeling of maybe I don't belong. And I'll tell you the one moment when I did have this was when I went to grad school. When I went back to get my MBA, that first semester kicked my tail. And I started sort of thinking like, do I belong here? And it was more from the sense of, I had been out of school for a while. Like, it seems like the other students are catching on a lot faster. Maybe this wasn't the right decision for me, or maybe I'm not properly prepared. So that inner voice started to creep in. But then that foundation of Mom and Dad was like, no, you belong here. Go buckle down. Go get the resources or help that you think you need to overcome this little bit of turbulence, I would say, that first semester. And so I quickly was able to sort of have good self-talk in that moment. And I always think about what is the inner voice that my children will have. And I hope that they have a similar inner voice that my parents gave me, those moments of belonging. So when I think about, I know I belong when, it's really rooted in, I can show up as my authentic self. But let me be clear when I say my authentic self. Your authentic self has various versions of itself too.
Yes.
Because John as a dad, John as a fraternity brother, John as a co-worker will wear sort of different hats, but I don't ever want to lose the essence of who I am. So if you saw me on the weekend, you would say, oh, that's my coworker John, even if I'm in, let's say, dad mode. Or if my children saw me at work, they wouldn't be like, my dad is acting funny, like I don't recognize my dad. But there are different elements of our strengths and our personality traits that we have to sort of peak at different moments depending on what the environment requires. So I always tell people, for me, that's it. Never lose the essence of who you are. But I also think that in being your authentic self, there's a time and place for certain aspects of who we are to show up as well.
Yeah, because I will say the Christopher that shows up, kind of in the corporate world, while it is the same Christopher that's showing up at the Pride Festival, it's going to look really different.
There you go.
Really different. Right?
You're going to have different muscles that you're pulling and leveraging in those moments.
Exactly. But still being authentic to who I am, right? I like to joke to say, if people can't figure out that I'm a gay guy within the first 5 minutes of talking to me, you don't need to know. I am Christopher 100% of the time. You know that I have kids, you know that I'm a gay guy, these are things that are the salient identities, and you're going to know them because they surround me.
Yes.
And so, the tone it up, tone it down, right? How do we make sure that we're presenting ourselves in a way that is also going to ensure that we get the response that we also want, right? Because it's also our responsibility of making sure we're showing up in spaces in a way that's going to make sure that we're being appropriate, right? And making sure that we are reading our audience and being respectful of our audience to make sure that they also know that they belong too, just as much as we want to belong as well.
For sure. I agree. And I'll add one more piece, Christopher, to that. And I think I sort of referenced it in the beginning, insider versus outsider. And I want to pause because I think some of those moments, maybe where I entered a room and I'm unfamiliar, you naturally may feel like, okay, do I belong here? And if I was a person that didn't, maybe I was a newcomer to the room, there were always people that would usher me in or do an extra welcome to say, hey, John, we want to welcome you to our table. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And so I offer that as a practical step, whether you are the person who's been anchored in that room. If you see someone new, you have an obligation to pull them in. Yes. And if you are someone new to the room, the people that are anchors to that room, I feel like have the same obligation to you to pull you in. And there are various ways you can do that. You could, if you're new to a room, you could go to someone and say, hey, I've never been in here. Could you help facilitate some introductions? Because I've had some good leaders that sometimes have elbowed me and said, hey, speak up. Like, you have some good ideas here. I know you do. This is the time to be quiet. And so those are real moments where you know you belong, because maybe you needed someone to kind of motivate you to use your voice in the way that you intend to. And so I think I don't want people to lose sight of that. You may see like, well, someone didn't say something. Well, maybe they were unsure how to enter that conversation. So if you are an anchor in that space, invite them into that conversation.
Yeah, we have the responsibility as leaders to watching the room, seeing who is not as engaged or over-engaged. I think we also have the responsibility of maybe telling some of our very extroverted friends, I'm holding the mirror up to myself, of making sure you're not dominating the conversation. And so I've had to talk to myself and been like, okay, Christopher, you are dominating this conversation way too much. My responsibility is how do I pull the others in so that we're getting their voices included. So I think it goes both ways, making sure that how are we balancing the personalities in the room and bringing those folks in who need a little bit more time to get warmed up so that their voice is just as much as included as the person who is stealing a lot of the oxygen.
Well, look, I'll tell you how I help myself with stealing oxygen. I love the mute button. If we're on a virtual call, I always default to being on mute because it'll catch me. Like, I'm like ready to blurt out. I'm like, oh, I'm on mute. You know what? I need to sit back anyway. or someone already said it. So I love the mute button for that simple fact that
Yes.
it gives me the double click before I would enter, because being mindful of your radio time.
Yeah, also, when you're not in a virtual space, when I was younger, I would always, they talked about the T in the classroom, right? And I would be the one who would sit at the top of the T, center, front line, right? However, I noticed that I dominated the conversation. So what I actually did is I sat at the back of the T. I would sit in the center, in the very back row, so that I could see the entire room. And then I could see, because behind me, I couldn't see anybody. And I was just thinking people weren't trying to respond, right? Because I couldn't see them. But when I sat in the back of the room, I could see when people you can see physical signs when somebody's getting ready to say something.
Yeah.
And I've been like, you know what? That I've spoken a lot, or, hey, I would really like to hear their thoughts. So I'm just going to sit back and wait for them to talk. And that really helped me as somebody who is an extrovert and likes to talk, is to check myself, right? And to say, okay, how much have I contributed to the conversation? I also love, there's a pro tip, there's a really great rule that I love to use both when I'm facilitating and when I'm a participant. And it's called WAIT. And it's an acronym for why am I talking? And then the flip side is why aren't I talking? And so when I'm facilitating a conversation, I say to people, apply the WAIT rule. Why am I talking? Am I adding value? Has it not been said yet? But the inverse, the why aren't I talking? Have I been shut down? Has something triggered me to not want to talk? And if that happens, I open the door to say, come to me and tell me that something happened that shut you down so that we can fix it, so that we can get you back re-engaged in the conversation, because I don't want to lose your voice the entire time that we are here. Using that WAIT rule of why am I talking or why aren't I talking is a really great way to help make sure that we're balancing conversations and creating a space where people know that they belong.
Very helpful. I just wrote that down. I've never heard of the WAIT rule, but it has newly been adopted. So thank you for sharing that pro tip.
Oh, you're so welcome. We've been doing a lot of pro tips today,
yes,
which is great. Okay, so we've been talking about creating cultures of belonging, but we do have to talk about when belonging doesn't happen. So talk about a time when you felt excluded, underestimated, or even erased when leading teams or just being in a space that you did say, I don't belong here.
That's another deep, deep question, Christopher.
I told you they were going to be hard hitting.
Yes, I wanna pause on that one. I think there can be times when you're navigating, probably specifically when you're new to an organization, especially at an executive level, where you're entering an established group. They have been working together, living together, raising their families together. And so you try to figure out, okay, how can I sort of fast track belonging? But I think naturally, it's natural tendency that people go to where they have relationships. And so in those first 30, 60, 90 days, it can be challenging because, people have their lunch buddies, and you're having to really put yourself out there to say, free for lunch, can I join you? Can I join your trio? But also in those moments, I make sure that I keep myself motivated on the outcome that I'm looking to achieve. Because I can't be upset that people have established relationships already. I am just trying to garner the opportunity to build new relationships to support what already exists. And so in those moments of not feeling maybe as included, is typically a clear example is just when you're new to an organization, new to an environment. I'll never forget when I left, when I was at Miami Middle Sports Entertainment for 10 years, I was very steep in my relationships and just like everything. And then it hit me like a wall when I was going to join NASCAR that I knew no one. Like I had zero relationships. I felt like relationships were my superpower. So there was a little hesitation of like, okay, how can I enter this environment where there's one of me and there's thousands of others, but how can I fast track relationships? And so it can be scary, it can be daunting, but I will tell people continue to lean in. And I think it's an opportunity to find the small moments to connect. and remember. I'll never forget, one of my buddies told me, and it didn't make sense then, but now it does. And when I told him I was, taking the new role, he said, well, hey, you being married and having kids would be helpful. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I just finished my MBA. That's the helpful piece. He's like, no. He said, it is your ability to connect at the water cooler with people of all generations.
Yeah.
And he said, me being a single person with no spouse or partner, no children, I can't start that conversation naturally with like, where do your kids go to school? Or what doctor do you go to? Or who's your pediatrician? And he's like, a lot of times those are easy pathways to build relationships and conversations with people that I am unable to participate in without being like, why are you asking about kids? You don't have kids. And so I thought that was a great lesson. And I called him months later and I was like, you are absolutely correct. I am, building relationships with peers who have adult children, and mine are 8 and 10. But one thing we found common ground on was being parents.
What a great way to find places that you belong and understanding what common ground do people have, right? And how do we start those conversations with folks from that point? And I think we miss that a lot, especially in today's world, is that we actually have a lot more things in common than we do that we don't have in common or that we're different from each other. So how do we start at the places that we can find community in and start the conversation there? And then we'll branch out to figure out, okay, where do we diverge into different communities? But then the great thing is that how could we be invited into their community, or how do we invite them into our other communities so that we can continue to open the doors, and so those differences start to be less different?
Yes, I guess another pro tip I'll offer here, and I think this works whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Whenever you're entering a new space and environment, 9 times out of 10, if you lead with transparency and sort of lowering the waterline on yourself, like, this is who I am, I got this bruise on my knee, let me tell you how it happened. People will do it in return, and then they'll share that, hey, I have the same scar on my knee from when I fell on my bike as a kid, and then you start to build connective tissue. I'll never forget, I had a colleague who was a peer, and we kind of had a choppy start. It was more just understanding each other's style, and so I said, I'm always the person that's like, let's go to lunch. But in that going to lunch, we didn't talk about anything work related. It was all like, oh, I didn't realize your kids are doing this, or you do that and you do this. We left there with a connection point that was outside of the workplace that strengthened our workplace connection point, because now I can see you for the person you are outside of here versus just you're the hard driving XYZ and I'm the hard driving XYZ over here. Now it's like, yes, we can be hard driving together and we're going to get to an outcome that works for everybody. But after that, how's your son doing? How's your daughter? Oh, did you go out on the boat this weekend? Those moments help smooth that over and keep the relationship intact. Because guess what? Being in the workplace or being around people, you're going to have friction. So I don't want people to think that friction isn't a part of life, but it's how do you work through that friction. And I always like to tell people it is the two of us versus the problem. It's not me versus you. So let's make sure we stay rooted in it's us versus the problem versus against each other.
Wow. That's I have to think about that for a little bit, right? That's going to be one of those where I'm going to have an aha moment after we hit the stop record button, and then we might just have to hit re-record to catch that. But we'll see. We'll see where we go. Okay, so I want to bring us to probably this is going to lead to another pro tip, but you have been in some really incredible seats to lead culture in many organizations. So if you were advising a new chief people officer, chief HR officer, what could they be doing in the first 30 days that is going to help be successful in creating a culture of belonging in their organization?
First step I'm going to say is listen. I think the L in leadership stands for listen. And that can be challenging for us extroverts. We're excited to share about this and that. But I think anytime you enter a new environment, you have to ground yourself in a listening tour, because you will be able to hear things because of your fresh perspective, because you're not bogged down in the white noise that exists because you haven't been there long enough. You just hear the comments for what they are, but then you'll start to be able to track themes. And these themes will help you understand whether I'm in an environment of high belonging or low belonging. And then you can start together, what are the data points, what are the pockets of friction that I need to put a game plan together to address. I also think it's equally important to make sure that, go back to that lowering the waterline concept, that you create connection points. So you probably have to be a little more extroverted in that moment to make sure that as a new leader, there's one of you, there's many others, but they can find some kind of common ground to you that you've already volunteered and offered up. And so in that listening tour, in that, get to know you moments where you're coming in and introducing yourself, put a couple sprinkles out there of things that people can connect to you on. So I'll give you an example. I'm a huge Big Brother show watcher. Like, I love Big Brother. It comes on every summer. My wife watches it. She introduced me to it. Now my girls watch it. So this summer it was a family thing. But I will oftentimes go into new environments and say, I love watching Big Brother, because it's either people who watch it or don't watch it. But what I recognize there is that whether you're introvert or extrovert, it gives you some thread that we can pull. So you could then send me a message and say, hey, I love Big Brother too. Or if you're an extrovert, stop me in the hallway and say it. And so there are little things that I'll try to drop about who I am personally, because it allows for people to find a relationship theme that they can pull on, and we can have a one-to-one. So again, listening is what the L in leadership stands for. But then I also think when we go throughout that, it really should be rooted in building relationships. And so that's where you sort of want to be transparent about who you are, because 9 times out of 10, people will do the same in return. And so now, as a new leader, I can double tap what I heard you say maybe 15 days ago and say, hey, Christopher, I noticed when we first met you referenced this. Can you tell me more about that? Because now in that listening tour, I need to get deeper to make sure what I heard was accurate, but also to make sure that I can get closer to identifying what is the root problem that we are trying to address.
What a great way to wrap up this conversation is to creating a culture of belonging by listening. That this is just where, this is what this whole podcast is about, and the conversations that we are going to be having. So, John, we're coming to the end of our conversation, our recorded conversation, and I'm asking everyone to finish the sentence, I know I belong when. So, John, I know I belong when...
All right, I wrote this down because I was ready for this. I know I belong when I don't have to edit myself to fit into a room. I can show up as John, the same person my daughters see at home and my coworkers see on the team. That's what belonging feels like to me.
You don't have to edit yourself when you walk into a room. Wow. That powerful, friend. So very powerful. Thank you for being an early guest on the show, a mentor to me, somebody who has challenged me in ways that I never thought I was going to be challenged. So thank you for that. This has been an absolute pleasure. And folks, hopefully this was a reminder to you that belonging is not a destination. It is a practice, and it starts with listening. So friends, if this episode challenged you to move outside of your comfort zone, please follow our show, add a comment about what you will do today to be a champion of belonging, and thank you for listening. Know that your bold, authentic self is welcomed, valued, and loved. And until next time, remember, you belong here.